Great.
Hello, Anish.
So good to see you.
And you. Fantastic.
Yes. So we should straight away get into the discussion. I think a lot of people will be, very interested in knowing what this rewilding is all about, because I'm sure a lot of audience that has joined us are from India, and in India the rewilding uh, meaning is slightly different from different countries. So I think to start with, my first request to you is to uh, talk about yourself, introduce yourself, and also a bit about the Global Rewilding Alliance.
Yes, great. So I'm Alister. I've been passionate about the environment since I was 16. I grew up in the west of Ireland on a windy, rainy hill in an old farmhouse. And every springtime, we had a ground nesting bird called the corncrake would arrive. A migratory bird would arrive from Africa. And these birds nest on the ground. But when I was 15, the neighboring farmer introduced silage making, which is a mechanized way of harvesting grass, where basically they go around these huge fields and mow the grass and collect it in big bales. And this had never been done before in the Irish landscape. And within 2 years, the corncrake was extinct, virtually extinct in Ireland.
Wow.
Because this technology was introduced in in a very short space of time. And so at school, I'd been reading about deforestation in the Amazon and all of these things. But here was technology, human technology on a collision course with nature right under my nose. And so that was a real epiphany for me. It woke me up just how a banal technology like grass cutting could eradicate a bird, push them right to the edges. There are still a few hundred pairs in Ireland every year, but they're right on the edges, places where the grass can't be cut. So that was what woke me up. And ever since then, I've been trying to make myself useful in the face of these huge challenges that we face. That's me. And I did my first bit of rewilding as an undergraduate. The word didn't exist then, but for my second year ecology project, I had to produce a plan. And I'd been working at an outdoor education center, and I went to the warden of the center and said, "Would you like me to produce a plan for the place?" And he said yes, and he implemented the whole thing. And now there's like a new forest there, and so on. So yeah, I've been passionate about this for 30 years, and now I've somehow found my way into the Global Rewilding Alliance, which is such a privilege. Tell me about you, Anish. Tell me about you, your journey.
Yes, so I was born in Bombay and now called Mumbai. Bombay or Mumbai is blessed because right in the heart of Mumbai city, we have a 103 square kilometer national park. And it has currently more than 45 leopards. So one leopard per 2.5 square kilometers.
Wow.
Yes, and it has more than, I would say 280, nearly 290 species of birds, more than 50 species of reptiles and amphibians, nearly that many species of mammals. As far as plants go, I think if my memory is not failing me, there are more than 800 species of flowering plants.
Wow.
So to be born in one of the most busiest cities, but also having to have a natural ecosystem was a blessing. And I was fortunate that very early in life, I could sense the calling that I had in me. And I would always keep looking at birds around my home. There are a lot of species of birds. And back then, more than, I would say 45 years ago, obviously the diversity was much more. There's much more greenery in the city, a lot of snakes. So I was crazy about snakes. I started rescuing snakes when I was in the 8th standard, kept rescuing birds. People kept calling me for various kinds of animals because they couldn't differentiate between what they were seeing and what I was doing. So although I started with snakes, but I ended up even rescuing leopards in Mumbai. So that is how I started my life, and then went on and did, my PhD, but in fluid mechanics and surface chemistry. Um, but I was always interested in nature, and I started estimating tiger densities. Was a volunteer with the Wildlife Conservation Society (WCS) way back in 1994. Even when I was doing my master's in Institute of Chemical Technology, every year about 1.5 2 months I would go and volunteer and count tigers. So that's how my passion, which was already there, grew. And by the time I finished my PhD, I pretty much made up my mind that I'm not going to do anything in the field of chemical engineering or chemistry, and that I would rather follow my heart. And even after having a PhD from Institute of Chemical Technology, I went on to work for Sanctuary Asia, which is a very popular wildlife magazine.
Yeah.
We started what is called Kids for Tigers, which was a conservation education program for children. We also started the Wildlife Service Awards during that year, 2000, 2001. And by 2009, I became part of Wildlife Conservation Trust, which is the organization that I work in today. And we have 95 people, and we work on large landscapes, on carnivores, and we are guided by science. So most of our projects are large scale, and they are in pretty complex ecosystems. We'll talk about that, but that's how I started. And when I look back, I really find that I'm extremely fortunate to know very early in life what I loved.
Yeah.
Just like you, for you there was a trigger. For me, it just was part of me, and I'm very happy. And therefore I still invest time on young children and their parents to basically tell them that if your child is asking you things about nature which is completely disconnected with the current life of people in the big cities, you should not ignore it, because in such children you might find the future conservationists.
Yes, I thoroughly agree with that. I think we all have somewhere, often hidden beneath some layers, we have an inherent connection with nature. Because all of us, even those who've lived in cities for 30, 40, 50 years, it's only a couple of generations. You know, my grandfather was a farmer in the south of Ireland, grew fruit and had and crops and so on. And so, you know, we're very close, really, in generational terms to, and you probably had this experience of, you show children a small animal like a spider or something, or you get them growing food, and there's just an immediate connection and a sense of wonder and interest in this life.
So today, earlier at around 12, I had because it's a World Environment Day, there was a online discussion, and we had 3 children, and all of them were either in between 5th to 7th standard. And it's amazing the kind of knowledge and the spark that you see in their eyes when they talk about nature. And I'm sure every single child who is even remotely exposed, you have to be exposed. You can't be in a desert like a completely zero biodiversity kind of a landscape and fall in love with nature. You have to have some connection. But every child who's walked in a stream, gurgling stream, or has gone for a walk in a garden, or has actually picked an ant in his or her hand, inherently is interested in nature. Somewhere along the line they lose interest, because I think the parents don't find scope in nature. Everybody is thinking about, now at least I'm talking about my country, where people very early start thinking about jobs, start thinking about professions. So, as I grew, my grandmother used to tell me that when I used to go and come home extremely dirty, and my mom used to be very angry because she had to clean up the mess. And she used to tell me, and at that point, I didn't understand what she meant. She said, unless a child gets his or her hand dirty in the soil, they cannot grow. Unless you climb a mango tree and break a mango from there and eat it, and if it's your neighbor's mango tree, that's the way you learn things. And so I didn't understand that. And I now know what she meant. She meant that you have to have that, urge for exploration. You need to be inquisitive. You need to find, your love in the environment. So
Yeah.
so yeah, there is so much to learn from generation, especially your grandparents. And this planet is our great grandparent,
Yeah.
and we have this devastated this planet. We were not born in a very healthy planet, you and I, but I'm sure people who were born about 400 years ago, 300 years ago, didn't have to think about rewilding anything. They were born in a wild place. They were like any other species, probably at par with those species. But now we have started working. First, we have damaged, and now that's the reason why we're talking about rewilding. So, Alister, what I would like you to do, in short, uh, why GRA? Why Global Rewilding Alliance? And you have worked with teams across several countries. So how is rewilding different in different places, and what are the similarities? So both the differences and similarities. It will be interesting to know.
Yes, good. So the Global Rewilding Alliance has been going for 3.5 years. And I joined 18 months ago as Director of Communications and Outreach. So it emerged from the World Wilderness Congress, which happened, I think, about 5 years ago. And there, the organizations realized that the rewilding movement was really becoming something after about 20 years since the word was first coined. And there was a need for some organization to provide an umbrella to connect all of the different people and organizations who are trying to bring back nature around the world, and to provide some kind of foundational services to support the efforts of each of these organizations. And so some people got together and they wrote a document called the Global Charter for Rewilding the Earth. And that is our foundational charter. It identifies some principles of what rewilding means and how it is different from nature conservation or even nature restoration. And it's this idea of allowing nature to lead. And I've heard Paul Jepson and Kane Blythe describe the difference between nature conservation and rewilding, being nature conservation is human-led and nature-assisted, whereas rewilding is nature-led and human-assisted.
So you need to have a lot of patience in rewilding, because you'll have to have those propagules to come in on its own. So basically, do you need ecosystems around that location? Because otherwise, how will immigration happen? So how would those species? So if there is, like you spoke about a farm, they have absolutely decimated the natural flora. Because of that, the fauna is gone. And now you're talking of rewilding that particular parcel. But if that parcel is not connected to another source, how does rewilding happen on its own? So when you say that it is to be led by nature, how will that happen?
Yes.
Because the higher order animals will find it difficult to come there. I mean, birds, of course, can come, but only few species, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do in that kind of a situation?
So, gosh, it's a massive debate, and it depends what scale you're talking about, Anish. So in some places, you're quite right. You already have an adjacent ecosystem that is more or less intact, in which case you can abandon, you can stop doing whatever you're doing that's destroying nature on that land, whether it be cattle production or plowing or whatever. And then the nature will come in, and often that will happen incredibly quickly. I mean, we have a partner in Uganda where they had a big landslip on a hillside which had been deforested. They took over the management of that land. When they started, they had 50 species of birds. Within 3 years, they had 200 species of birds.
Wow.
And the forest just, because it's Uganda and it's like tropical and a lot of rain and so on, the forest just come back so quickly. Nevertheless, in many places, there are species which won't make it back on their own. And this, I think, is the interesting bit for the scientists, is how do we assess what this ecosystem should look like, and how do we help those species which are missing, which don't stand a chance of coming back. So, for example, across Europe at the moment, we are reintroducing the wild European bison, which is a huge, big grazing animal, a bit like the gaur in India. And of course, the bison, having gone down to only 100 individuals, 80 years ago would never make it past all of the human infrastructure, the motorways, etc., to get to Spain and Romania and all of these places where it's now living. So they need a bit of assistance. And it's the same with a lot of, especially mammal species. Again, you know, reintroductions of things like beavers and so on. So it's a judicious process where we think about it a lot and do a lot of research, and we talk to each other and other rewilders who've already achieved these things, and then we apply that knowledge and that sort of good judgment, I would say. So I wouldn't say there are any hard and fast rules, you know. But I mean, I'm sure you've got lots of examples in India, Anish. I mean, why don't you answer your own question? I mean, what are you doing?
Well, fortunately, India, again, because it's a tropical country and our culture is unique. And I can say that because I have been to several, I was at the Wilderness Congress that you're talking about, where rewilding, the word was coined. So I've met so many scientists, so many conservationists from across the planet. The difference between India and most countries, probably Bhutan and Nepal, are similar to how India thinks, even Sri Lanka for that matter. There is a culture of, there's inherent resilience, inherent tolerance for damage caused by wild animals. You know, world over, the large mammals were decimated because they were considered as direct competition to human beings, especially carnivores. Whereas in India today, we have the highest density of tigers. Now, India has the highest density of people. We are 1.4 billion and growing. Land-wise, we are very small compared to so many other countries. It's a big country. It's 3.5 million square kilometers. It's not small, but for 1.4 billion people, it's a very dense nation. Despite that, you have the highest density of tigers. You have very, very high density of leopards. There could be nearly 15 to 17,000 leopards, and many of those live alongside people in villages, around villages, small, just parcels of land, a few acres. You know, even tigers. You have tigers living right alongside our cities, like Bhopal, which is the capital city of Madhya Pradesh, which is the tiger state of the country, and you have 12, I would say about 15 tigers living within 5 kilometers of the city. Yeah, and tiger is the largest cat on earth. The Royal Bengal tiger is actually larger than, or heavier than the Siberian tiger, contrary to popular belief. You know, there some males can be 260, 270 kgs. Oh. Yeah, which is more than 4 times an average weight of a human adult. So the culture of this country has somehow managed to keep nature intact in pockets. So maybe 200 years ago, India was largely forested, natural ecosystems with islanded villages and small towns. Now what you have is a reverse, where you have, it's an island of humans and these small parcels of land. So we really still have a lot of biodiversity in many of our parks. The Project Tiger, which was launched in 1973, and the Wildlife Protection Act, which was launched in 1972, both these instruments together were instrumental in safeguarding the biodiversity in the name of the tiger. And there was another important act of wildlife. It's called the Forest Conservation Act, which came in 1980. Between these three, we were able to conserve species. We were able to reduce the conversion of forest land into non-forest. And so what has happened is that you have wildlife. However, because of the pressure of people, livelihoods are very much dependent on forests and other natural ecosystems. There are nearly 300 million Indians whose livelihoods are dependent on natural ecosystems to about 40%. So you can imagine such large populations dependent on the forest. So the forest is slowly getting degraded. So while on the map, India has more than around nearly 22% forests. If you look at on paper. But if you actually went there, only about, I would say, 50% of that is in good condition, which means the ecosystem services that we are getting from those forests is pretty much intact, which probably was so about 100 years ago. But the large chunk, nearly 10% of our forests, which is a big area, is degraded. So what in India rewilding, and that the government has done amazing amount of work, and we are working closely with some state governments and even the center to catalyze uh, you know conservation of large landscapes with the science that we do. And so what do we, for us, rewilding means um, expanding existing protected areas. So India has nearly 900 protected areas. All of them put together is 5% of the country. So through research, we find that some neighboring parcels are good, and we make a proposal with the help of the state government to see if that particular park can be expanded. So that area which was outside will now suddenly become well protected, and that will get rewilded because the densities of species, the diversity would have gone down. But once it becomes part of the protected area,
Yeah.
then the densities will go up automatically, naturally. Then another important, as I said, Project Tiger. Project Tiger, if you see every tiger reserve, then we are about 30, 54, 55 tiger reserves in India. It is divided into core, which is the source population, and around it is a ring of buffer. Buffer is an area which is a multiple use area where there are people and there are wild animals. They live, they coexist, and that is the area where the human wildlife conflict is very high. So we do lot of research to see which are the bottlenecks, which are the areas where the degradation is leading to increased conflict. We also try and see if the buffer zone can be extended in some direction. So if, say, there are two parks and the buffer zone of both these parks are like this, we try to see if we can build the bridge between them.
Yeah.
And it could be a corridor which has legal standing. And it is part of the buffer zone of one of the tiger reserves. So you can bring these tiger reserves closer to each other. Or third is to notify corridors. So where it will not be a protected area, people will continue to do what they're doing, but the status of that land from reserve forest, it will remain reserve, but it will be notified, it will be attached to one of the tiger reserves, so that more money can be spent on conservation activity, where obviously the government is ensuring that the tree cover remains as is, but there is not much training as far as wildlife goes. So by upgrading that reserve forest to a corridor status, you automatically start inputting in terms of the wildlife bit. So how to manage wild animals there, that training is done. So the WCT also does training of the frontline forest staff. We train them in law enforcement, in forensics. We do trauma training as well, because it's a very tough job. There are thousands of frontline forest staff in India, and they're exposed to bad weather, extremely hot, extremely wet areas, obviously conflict with people and attacks by animals. So that trauma management training is what we do. We also equip them with vehicles, some basic equipment, so that their patrolling intensities can go up. We train them in what is called what you call SMART, which is basically a patrolling strategy, where your entire trek that you take as a forest guard, when you walk into your forest, you basically, with a GPS, your route is marked, and the director of the park every 15 days can look at that map of all the walks that all the guards have done, to see if there are any holes, how do you plug in, which are those areas where the disturbances are high. So WCT is basically helping states in improving the science that is needed to conserve species and landscape in a way where it can be measured properly. Because otherwise, you just protect something, you say we have increased the size of a park and wildlife will come back. While it will come back, we need to know what are the problems, and for that, science is important. So our main role, we think, is that of a catalyst, where we just try to see gaps that exist in the government machinery and try and strengthen and trying to fill up those gaps. So that's what we do when it comes to rewilding. So in India, rewilding really means different stuff, but when it comes to some species like the pangolin, which is an endangered species, and there is, as you know, world over there is a huge pressure of illegal wildlife trade, and it is probably the most traded mammal currently. What we are trying to do is working on rehabilitating confiscated pangolins. So many a times these pangolins are caught with traders. The forest department will go and release them, but they have been starving for maybe 15 days, 20 days. They're not in good condition, and when they are released in the wild, they will pretty much die. And so what we've done is we started tagging them. We started understanding from our tagging process. We've understood what they need, which is the best habitat for them. So we help the state government to decide which are those best areas where they can release. Plus, we are also building our knowledge base on this very elusive species. So that is a direct rewilding exercise for a species. But otherwise, it's mostly strengthening the government so that the protection quality can go up and species can come in. Obviously, there is a team in WCT that also works in tandem with the government to translocate large carnivores from areas which has a good density to areas which have lost all carnivores. So, you know, it's basically 3 C's are very important in rewilding: the core, the corridor, and carnivore.
Yeah.
So we work on these 3 C's.
Yes, wonderful. And I think we're trying to add a 4th C, which I haven't found the right word yet, but I'm calling them chewers.
Yes, herbivores.
Herbivores, because they're very necessary in a lot of landscapes. So I think the 3 C's are good. I think 4 C's would be even better. We have to find a better word than chewers.
Yeah, because I understand what you're saying, because for us, carnivores will not survive if there are no wild herbivores, right? Yeah. And so exactly, we consider herbivores as when we talk of carnivores, but that doesn't allow us to rewild areas where there have never been carnivores of that size, right? Yeah. So therefore, I think chewers is a great term, and I think so this will also give kind of a you know, a kind of a solution to bring back those ecosystems where you know, it's like you're talking about the bison there. There is no large carnivore that can be reintroduced in UK, but in Europe rather. But the bison has to come back, and therefore there is no natural predator unless obviously the wolf comes back. Yeah. So yeah, this chewers is also something which is important for several countries.
Yes. So it's amazing what you're doing, Anish, and there are many equivalents between the role of WCT and the role of the Global Rewilding Alliance, in that you are trying to accelerate the learning process across the whole of India. And what we're trying to do on the global scale is to connect organizations that are facing similar challenges. So, for example, if you're working with big cats in India, you are essentially facing the same challenges as if you're reintroducing jaguars in Argentina or mountain lions in northeastern United States, or, you know, lynx in Spain and Portugal, because, you know, these are big cats. So there's a lot to be learnt between organizations, and we do a lot of connecting by ecosystem, by shared rewilding challenge, and also by geography. So when, for example, yesterday I had a new inquiry from an organization in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. They have an area of 4,000 hectares in which they are rewilding. We have 2 other member organizations in KwaZulu-Natal. So my first thought is to connect them together. We have a youth movement based in a university there who are looking for things to go and do, like helping to get rid of invasive plant species, for example. So automatically we're thinking about how do we make these connections so that we can accelerate the process. And that's very satisfying, very, very beautiful thing for us.
Wow. So yeah, it is. So you're also catalyzing you know, exchange of scientific information. Plus, there is a lot of work that you have done on carbon cycles, right?
Yes.
So I think that will be very interesting for the audience, because
okay. I can speak
it's
to that.
yeah, because I think it's important to understand that finally you have to measure these things. So how do you measure? You can't just go and measure everything out there. So are there such species that one can focus on to look at that ecosystem through the eyes and ecology of those species? So there are some interesting papers that I have read. So if you can,
Yeah.
probably take a couple of examples of large mammals, maybe ocean, maybe elephants, and also smaller species, because there are so many places across the planet, like New Zealand, where you don't have large mammals really. But how do
Okay.
you then talk about accelerating the carbon
Yeah.
cycle there?
Yes. So this brings me to the 4 pillars of our work. So there's science, we work on science, we work on policy, we work on building the movement, and we work on engaging the public. So those are the 4 pillars of our work. And you're talking about the science pillar. Our mission overall is to help mainstream the idea of rewilding globally in science, policy, and practice by 2030. And at the rate of growth of awareness that we have at the moment, I actually think that we're going to get there early, because there's something about this movement that is just so inspiring and beautiful. Just even the word rewilding, you see people hear it for the first time, and it sets off a little kind of very good explosion in their mind of like, this idea that the progress of humanity is not necessarily hardwired into the decline of nature, that we can progress as a species, as humanity, and we can reinstate beautiful wild nature. And so this is kind of this message of hope and pragmatic doability is at the heart of, I think, everything that we're trying to do as rewilders and as communicators. So just to come back to that first pillar, the science pillar, at the beginning of the Global Rewilding Alliance, a strategic decision was made to invest a lot in making a bridge between the rewilding agenda and the climate agenda by showing that rewilded ecosystems can draw down vast amounts of carbon. And working particularly with Oswald Schmitz, who's a professor at Yale University, we've created a new strand of scientific inquiry called Animating the Carbon Cycle. Because what we realized, not we, I mean, I use that term loosely, I wasn't involved, but there was a realization that the role of animals in the carbon cycle has been grossly underestimated. And so they set out to collect together subject experts on 9 species, and I usually remember 8 of them, but it's tropical forest elephants, whales, ocean fish, sharks, otters, musk oxen, bison, and there are 2 more.
What about were there grasshoppers or insects also in there?
No, there weren't. So we're very aware that there's a big role for grasshoppers in grassland ecosystems, and we're starting to look at that and bring together those experts. But what we initially did was we brought together experts on these 9 species and collected together the evidence on what happens if you reinstate good levels of populations of each of those animals. And we aggregated that, and we showed that just for those 9 species, if reinstated to decent numbers, would enable the drawdown of the equivalent carbon to each of the IPCC's top 5 options for mitigating climate change, just 9 species. And we've just published extra evidence. So now the people at Oz and other people at Yale have created a model which can be applied prospectively to landscapes to show you, if you rewild this landscape and get the ecosystem back into good condition, this is the amount of carbon that you can draw down. And we've just published a story about bison in Romania, where 170 bison are enabling the drawdown of the equivalent of taking something like 80,000 American cars, big fat American cars, off the road.
Wow.
So just 170 bison. And that story has gone around the world. We were in partnership with WWF, and their tracking service, their impact tracking service, says that story in the first 2 weeks reached 700 million people.
Wow.
So, um, so which is bad news for my inbox, because then lots of people get in touch saying, how can we join the alliance? It actually becomes a problem, you know, this success, because people are people are so inspired by these kinds of stories, you know. So a lot of our work is to take that science and then take the message of hope that's rigorous, it's based in good data, it's peer reviewed, it's published in the top journals. That was published in Nature Climate Change, one of the global top journals, and take that. But then my job as a communications guy is to turn that into stories that will stick in people's minds and give them hope and inspire them. Because
so basically make those stories palatable for the common man, so that
yes,
policymakers,
exactly.
because policymakers also, you know, like to stay away from jargons, and scientists oftentimes cannot translate it in a language that policymakers understand.
Right.
So
So
you guys act as an interpreter.
yeah,
You're an interpreter for it.
exactly. And I spent 15 years on that science policy boundary in my career, working in academia here in the UK, but internationally as well. And then taking academics and taking them into Parliament, briefing ministers, going on the radio and in the newspapers. And we used to run media training for experts. And I remember a woman from the Financial Times, the London Financial Times, saying, we were always told to write for an intelligent 12-year-old. So even in the Financial Times,
Wow.
write for an intelligent 12-year-old. So, you know, I apply that sort of perspective to everything that we do. Yes, people are incredibly intelligent, but they're also busy. So everything that we do has to be on two sides of A4 maximum. It has to be very accessible, has to give people a story very quickly without doing violence to the rich complexity of the reality of the situation. But above all, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to associate rewilding with hope, because I reckon if we can achieve that, then we are halfway there to achieving our goals.
Yeah, and but so there is a follow-up question on this. So when you talk of 170 bisons, what is the time scale? Because see, every ecosystem is at a different level of either disturbance or you know, the history may be like 300 years ago, something has vanished from there. And so that has had a cascading effect on the ecosystem. And now the ecosystem is at a state which is very different from what it was because of that species. So,
right.
So what is the generic time scale? I mean, it's very difficult based on where you are. But, you know, what is... So because most people today, and even the governments, they all want quick fixes.
Yeah.
Right? And so while we talk of science, often funders, everybody will say, I want to see impact. So this particular example that you gave, what is the time scale that one is talking about? Because there are so many. So in Australia, you can do a lot of things. There are so many places in Africa, obviously in India as well. But that time scale is something that one will have to keep in mind, because you know, policy and funding, they are both very, very, very important to the success of these programs everywhere.
Yeah, so let me give you a couple stories. I'll just comment on the bison, but then I'll talk about beavers in North America and otters as well. So bison used to roam the European landscape, and they disappeared at different times in history. So they've just been reintroduced back into Portugal. But the species of bison that was in Portugal went extinct. So we're now using European bison. I can't remember the name of the species that went extinct, but you're using the closest you can get to that animal. But there would have been ultimately, I mean, thousands, 10,000, 40,000 years ago, when there were huge die-offs of large mammals caused by the growth of the human population, because we just tended to you know, we tended to eat whatever came easily to us as we expanded our populations, and these animals couldn't reproduce fast enough. So it is true that, for example, you know, there used to be lions and hippopotamuses and elephants in Britain, but it depends how far back you go. And so I think the question about how far back you go is one that people are working out. And what we're doing is reintroducing species that were lost relatively recently. So, for example, in Britain, the beaver disappeared about 400 years ago. So it's still there, you know, it's still seen as a legitimate creature to bring back because it's a keystone species creating amazing benefits for wildlife when introduced into the rivers through its dam building and so on. But, you know, let me just mention about in America, when the Europeans arrived in America, it's estimated that 400 million beavers were killed for their meat,
Wow.
for their fur, and for their oil, for their scent. 400 million beavers. Whole states like Wyoming dried out as a result. So and similarly, like with the otter in California, when ecologists first did assessments of the ecology in California, the otter had been completely wiped out. So the otter was recorded as a non-native species by the ecologists because they arrived later after all of the hunters had arrived. So, and it's literally happening, I think, this year that the otter is finally getting re-recognized as a native species in California.
Wow.
In law. So this thing about time is it's a real kind of fractal, you know. It's full of sort of smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of work to be done there. But you know, when you think about the effects of climate change in the Midwest in the US, for example, where you're getting these big hot events now happening, the idea of the benefit of bringing back some of those millions of beavers to re-wet the landscape is massive. And talk about ecosystem services, you know, a dry academic abstract term. For me, that's about preventing drought, keeping water in the summer, stopping flooding in the winter. You know, these are what we mean by ecosystem services. They're very tangible human benefits that people right across the political spectrum, when they understand that a beaver is going to prevent their home from flooding, then they're going to be a lot more sort of keen on helping.
So that, you know, in India too, recently the government has reintroduced cheetah, which is
Yes,
a carnivore, and so again, so so India understands conservation well, but everything for most people, I mean, if you ask somebody, they'll say forest. So every ecosystem is equated with the
yes,
forest, and so a grassland, for instance, doesn't get that kind of support that one needs from the general public as well.
yes.
People understand that a tree is standing and the tree disappears, it is visible, but if there's a grass, and if the grassland gets transformed into farmland, nobody ever knows what's happening. It's very difficult. So this reintroduction program by the government, it was controversial because a lot of people spoke about African cheetah in India, and a lot of things happened. But as a ecologist, conservationist, I feel that the cheetah has it in it because of the charisma. And large carnivores, whether we like it or not, most people say, why do you focus on large carnivores? Why only apes? Why not the frog? Why not the snake? But you know, there is a certain amount of you know, fan following that these large carnivores have, and that's inherent. They can't do anything. So I think it is possible that because of the cheetah that has come in, and India lost its cheetah, a lot of hunting was happening during the time when the British were ruling. But even after that,
Sorry about that.
there were a lot of the Indians also continued hunting. The Maharajas were using them as game animals. They would take them and catch black bucks and stuff. So what has happened is that hunting happened, but that grassland habitat has also gone. And now that the cheetah is back, the government has started thinking about, you know, setting aside large grasslands. And what that will do to me, I mean, I feel that like the Great Indian Bustard, obviously the capacity of the grassland to sequester carbon is quite crazy.
Huge, huge.
And some of the most high biomass landscapes are grasslands because of, you know, a lot of things. You talk of Africa, you talk of the savannas, you go anywhere on grasslands and you will see a high diversity in large mammals. So there's huge biomass that grassland can support, and it is much more than the forest sometimes, right? So in the name of the cheetah, if somehow, because if the government sets aside grasslands now and rebuild or rewild those grasslands for the cheetah, automatically it will favor the wolf, which is now is endangered. It will favor the great Indian bustard, only a few hundred left now on this planet. And there are several such lesser floricans and so many other, even the sand grouse is going. And so some of these species that we were seeing as a child, I used to go to any dry habitat like in Rajasthan or Gujarat, you would see hundreds of sand grouse near the water in the evening. Now all those are lying empty because their roosts, which are grasslands, have gone. So I think rewilding, one habitat coming back because of one iconic species,
Yeah.
can actually be the shot in the arm of so many other species. So I think it's relevant, and that's why people get very excited when they hear this term. We have to, like you're doing, we'll have to interpret this term for different types of habitats, for different types of different countries. And I think, yes, there is a, and how many members you have already for the GRA?
So when I joined, it was 120. We're now 185, I think, as of this week. And we have a long list. So organizations are joining at about one a week. And we've just taken on another person in our voluntary team to help with the onboarding process, because we have a big backlog and we think it can be 2 a week. So it's fantastic. It's so inspiring, but it's quite a lot to manage as well. And we want to do that process well so that when people join, that we can actually do the extra work of connecting them with other relevant organizations, etc. But let me just circle back to something you said there about this thing about grasslands. Grasslands are incredible, and I saw an amazing graphic, a moving graphic, like a video graphic of carbon release during plowing time. So every year when the plowing happens to sow crops in the American Midwest and in other grasslands, there's this huge plume of carbon released. And this was visualized in a very good graphic, which I need to hunt down. But this makes the point that reinstated grasslands again can draw down huge amounts of carbon. And we're working with organizations such as Altin Dala Project in Kazakhstan, where during the Soviet era, a lot of grasslands were plowed up, and huge amounts of carbon released, all of the wildlife pretty much wiped out. And now they are reinstating the Saiga antelope and the Kulan donkey and eagles and owls and all sorts. But also things like grasshoppers and dung beetles, which play very central roles in the ecosystem. But the model that we have now, the animating the carbon cycle model with Yale, can assess that prospectively, and this can be a very good tool, a strong tool for rewilders to go to their governments and say, we know that if you reinstate this 100,000 hectare grassland ecosystem in Rajasthan, it will draw down this many thousands of tons of carbon, thereby contributing to India's climate policy, achievement of its goals. Right. So,
and also, something like that, which is measurable, which you can extrapolate with science, with understanding from other similar ecosystems, can also help in, catalyzing interest in the corporate sector, because there are a lot of people who want to do something for the environment, and doing something for a solar plant or fighting plastic or solid waste management has been done and should be done. But there is this rewilding because most people in the environment sector and the corporates and people who are funding any program, they are worried as to how are you going to measure things. And so they want a very, very unambiguous feedback mechanism. So once you put something like this in place, I think what this can do is you could even get into, bonds where you could go to prospective donors and say that this is the program. In 10 years, this is the amount of carbon that will be sequestered by this ecosystem, and we will be measuring it like this. There could be a third party that comes in and measures this for them. And if that happens, the money that you invest in this project can be returned to you with some dividends. And then you can go to organizations, say a UNEP or a UNDP or other organizations, multilateral agencies who are anyways setting money aside. Those could actually come in after the project has succeeded to give them, where they can actually redeem their investments. So I think once you also start seeing the business sense in something like this, I think somewhere conservationists have to start ideating to see how more money can be attracted. Not everybody has the time to understand nature, and therefore it becomes very difficult to convince them if there is no business sense in it. But people do understand that if it is measurable and if climate change is real, all the governments are talking and are aligned to fight climate change. And if this project is going to have multiple benefits, win-win for the local farmers, win-win for biodiversity, and also water systems, because the moment you rewild an ecosystem, you will get the water recharging automatically in that area. And water is very important for agrarian countries where agriculture is still life and blood for people. So I think it's very interesting that you're talking about this, and I feel that if we can put our fingers on exact deliverables, and if the indicators are very well carved out, we will also have no dearth of money.
Yes. Brilliant. Well, look, it's an amazing discussion. We've got 7 minutes left, Anish. So I guess we're moving towards our final thoughts, really. I mean, just building on what you've just said, I'm aware that today is World Environment Day, so happy World Environment Day. Thank you for being a catalyst for and a leader in this amazing movement. We are affiliates of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which I'm sure you are as well. And they have an amazing program. They have an amazing awards scheme. You can get whole landscapes recognized and so on. And it's just, what they're doing is really amazing. And I just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, I think, they're doing fantastic stuff. In fact, this particular Environment Day, this 2024, they're highlighting ecosystem restoration, desertification, and drought resilience.
Yes.
So, and all this is connected, So if you are going to get the ecosystems back, or you're going to restore your ecosystems, well, you are automatically fighting desertification. And restoring ecosystem, I would say, is not just natural ecosystem. If it is farming, and say in India, nearly 65% of Indians are subsistence farmers. Still 65%.
Wow.
Just imagine the amount of people you're talking about. If we can restore, even their farms, which means that if the biodiversity on their farms can go up while they reap the benefit as farmers, I think that will act as a huge buffer against the wrath of climate change, erratic. So that in itself, if you can get the grasslands back, if the farms can get certain agroforestry projects back on it, you automatically will have water flowing. That will basically is talking about drought resilience. So this Environment Day and the topic there's a direct marriage between what we have spoken today. So I think it's amazing the kind of opportunities that can come out if you do the science in the right way, if you ask the right questions, and science should always be your guiding light. And so I really am looking forward to our association as the partners of this alliance to learn and also share our learnings with other organizations who are trying to do similar things, maybe at different scales. But I think there is a solution for every scale. So you can do rewilding in a 1 acre plot, and you can do rewilding in a 10,000 hectare landscape. The only thing is the number of players who will then be needed to start inputting different kinds of knowledge in it will change. And so I think this alliance is a very, very good and important step forward. And I'm looking forward to actually meeting many of these people. Online is, of course, more energy efficient. But like right now, we do catch up during the IUCN meeting, during the World Wilderness Congress and all that. But pretty soon, I think that it's not far where the Rewilding Alliance will meet only to discuss the different formulas that people are using and from the success. And I think as an Indian, I feel there is a lot to learn from our knowledge with the indigenous people. There are so many people, communities who have been living with the jungles and they're still living inside the forest, not in cities. And if you go there, I have never come out starving. In the remotest part, I may not have anything with me, but when I go there, there is food to eat. They will welcome you with a smile. So I think there is knowledge right where we are. So while we can look outside for inferences that have been built on the science that has been done, but there is no dearth of knowledge within our own countries. And I think as a Rewilding Alliance, we should also emphasize about the indigenous knowledge base. And I'm sure you guys are already doing it in a big way.
Well, thank you. Yes, so we are currently, we have a master's student working on a report on indigenous people and rewilding. Because sometimes indigenous people, you say the word rewilding and they look at you as if you're mad because, well, I mean, their whole ontology, their whole way of looking at the world is different from the Western way of the scientific way. They are nature. I was hearing that, I think with some of the North American indigenous people, 80% of their words are verbs.
Wow.
So whereas in European languages, 80% of the words are nouns. So for them, when they describe the world, it's like the forest is doing something, and that is being a beach, and that is being a salmon, that is being a bear. It's a completely different way of looking at things. So how we bridge those gaps is really interesting to us. So how we work with indigenous people, recognizing the wisdom and traditions, and bringing that in service, because 80% of the world's very biodiverse habitats are managed and controlled by indigenous people. So there's a huge agenda there. And I would just finally mention the Convention on Biological Diversity in October, which is taking place in Colombia. And we will be building, again, a position where we lobby to get rewilding recognized as the powerful, science-based, rigorous, and inspiring solution that it is inside the Convention on Biological Diversity, because it does not yet mention rewilding. So that's the sort of the policy leg of what we're doing. And if you can bring your government and so on, that would just be incredibly powerful. So, it's another example of how working together we can be much more powerful.
Yes, surely. So great. I think it's amazing, Alister. We are at 7:30 India time.
Yes, and 3 p.m.
We can go on and on. We can go on and on.
It's been a great hour, Anish.
Great hour of learning, and also I think it's an auspicious day. It's a day which is important for us. Both every day is an environment day, every day is a rewilding day, but it's still important that we really celebrate one such day even for rewilding, and so that it just allows that conversation happening at various levels, especially in institutes, in schools, in colleges, because that's where we are going to get our future scientists and the doers, so to say. So thank you, Alister.
Thank you.
I can't thank you. It's our own combined chat. But yeah, it's been great, and I'm looking forward to a lot more interesting discussions and also action. Discussions are good, but action's
better.
Should be rated higher than discussions.
Yes, so exactly. And I'm thankful to all of the people who tuned in. I've seen so many nice emojis coming up my screen and so on. Anybody who is still listening, tune into our websites, sign up. There's lots of ways in which you can get involved. This is a movement of people doing things, and it's incredibly entrepreneurial and innovative. And we need people's imagination and energy to drive this forward. So I would encourage everybody to get involved.
Yeah, great. So thank you everybody for joining. We are signing off now, but we are thinking all the time. And You must do
Talk
too.
soon. We'll connect again soon, Anish. Thank you very much.
Bye, Alister.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.